Hello, hello, hello. It's me, Michelle, your host and pocket DJ of Coffee Fueled Stories, a show where storytelling and coffee hang out. Today, we have a very special guest. Welcome, Mindy Quigley. Hello.
Hey, Michelle, it's great to be here.
This is awesome. So, we are going to be talking cozy, pizza, fluffball animals. But first, I wanted to say I've got a festive drink because it is the end of the holidays. So I am drinking a gingerbread coffee. Do you have a special drink that you are drinking right now?
I'm just on water now, sadly, but eggnog is my festive drink of choice.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, well, that's good to know. So, let's get right into your book here. So, we are talking 6 feet deep dish and pizza, and it's a cozy to let the listeners know you are a cozy author. I love cozies, and especially at this time of year. So I feel like having a cozy at the end of the year is like a great way to kind of like see the year off and welcome the new year. So tell me about writing cozies. Is that something that you were when you said you wanted to be a writer, did you know you were going to write cozies, or what were you thinking and feeling?
I absolutely did not know I was going to be writing cozies. I didn't even know that this existed as a genre. So I kind of came into it sideways that with my first series, which is about a young female hospital chaplain in North Carolina, I knew I wanted to write about hospital chaplains because I had worked in pastoral services at the Duke University hospital system and picked up all of these amazing stories from the hospital chaplains. And I thought, oh my gosh, somebody needs to tell these stories. But anytime I sat down to write them, they always were coming out quite dark because obviously it's a really challenging job and it's a really dramatic kind of environment. And I didn't feel like it reflected the reality of the chaplaincy because, yes, there are moments of extreme darkness, but there are also moments of extreme joy and lightness and especially Black humor, which is the thing that allows most people to do that kind of work. Um, so one day I was sitting on the bus on the way to work and it just hit me, wow, what if I did this as like a genre thing, like a murder mystery? And kind of thinking in that vein of the great murder mystery detectives who also are clerics of some nature. So there's like the Grantchester mysteries, Father Dowling mysteries, it's a whole genre. So I thought, hey, why not a young female hospital chaplain who solves mysteries? So I wrote 3 books in that series, and I think it was still a while before I even understood what the difference between a cozy mystery and a traditional mystery is, and that difference is blurring a little bit with some newer entries to the genre. But typically, a cozy mystery, or cozy fiction in general, doesn't have, it's very PG, like that, no excessive violence on the page, no swearing. Beyond just the mild, and any kind of like bedroom moments are happening behind closed doors. So without realizing it, that's kind of what I was writing, like lighthearted Hallmark style mysteries. So then when this opportunity came along, it was like, oh yeah, I guess I'm already writing those. So yes, I can do that because somehow fell into that without really realizing what I was doing.
That's really cool. That's really cool. So, I love how at the acknowledgments, you talked about how when you were trying to set this up and you were like something something pizza, something something mystery, and I thought that was really cute. Because sometimes just having an idea and thinking, I know there's something here. I have, so when you come up with an idea and then getting to the actual iteration, coming to the actual product, right? How long did it take you, or how long does it take you to write one of your books?
This series has been a departure a little bit for me because I sold it on a pitch. So the publisher, which is St. Martin's Press, bought 3 books in the series just based on the idea, 25-page sample chapters, and a little bit of jacket cover. Like that's all I gave them and they bought it. So it was very high concept and they were great to trust me. I think it's because I had that other series. They trusted that, this woman actually can put a book together and knows what she's doing. Um, but that also meant that I had a shorter deadline because often with writing, the way that you do it is you write your entire book, then you find an agent, then the agent sells it to an editor who will take it up the chain, and hopefully the publisher will agree to give you a contract. So you already have at least one book, maybe more, because that process can take so long. So sometimes you've already fleshed out or started a second book in a series before you sell it. So selling on a pitch accelerated the timeline significantly. So I think I had to deliver that first book about 9 months after I signed the contract, maybe even a little less. And then I was doing books every 9 or 10 months. So it was, yeah, it was blazing fast speed. With the second contract, so I turned in book six a couple months ago in this
Yes.
series. And with the second contract, which was also for three books, so books four, five, and six, I was able to slow the clock down just a teensy bit to give myself some breathing space. So that was more like 11 months per book. And usually that includes a month of doing nothing, which I found that I really need between series books.
That makes sense. So, do you also have to give yourself time to kind of come up with some of the recipes because you do have recipes at the end of the book?
Yes, and I've gotten better at incorporating that into the kind of like assembly line production process for these. So I used to wait until the end to test the recipes, like after I'd already finished the book. And that totally fell apart in book three because that book, I had this idea that it would be so my husband became lactose intolerant in his 40s, so he can no longer eat dairy products, and so did my sister. So I was dealing with that, and then my daughter was a vegetarian for many years, so we had a lot of like food related stuff going on in our household. And I thought it'd be really fun to do a pizza that, Delilah, our main character, chef, gets an order for a pizza that can't have gluten or nightshades or dairy in it. Like basically the no pizza pizza, like none of the normal ingredients, and you still have to come up with a pizza recipe. So I wrote the entire book and wrote that not only in as like an idea, but an integral part of the plot, like that needed to happen in order for some other things to happen, that she gets this crazy demanding order and has to fulfill it. And then when I was going to develop the recipes after I'd already written the entire book, I could not get a crust that worked with the other things. Like I had written it as a cauliflower crust, tried that, didn't work. So I was really kind of panicking because, the production was already underway. I'd already sent the book to my editor and there was no going back. Like this needed to be in there. So after that near disaster, by the way, I came up with a great recipe. If you want a good gluten-free crust for deep dish pizza, is in book three. But after that, I started to do recipe development earlier on. So, once I got the book underway and kind of had a sense about what it was all going to be about and what kinds of food might make sense to make. Because this is the other thing, my recipes, there are several culinary cozy series that just have the recipes at the back as kind of an addendum, like, oh, here's a book, it was has fudge in the title, so here's a bunch of fudge recipes, or like that. It doesn't necessarily weave into the plot the way that my recipes always do. And that's kind of why I realized I need to do it earlier because if the recipes change, that means that those parts of the book need to change too. And the recipes are written by the characters. So at the end, again, it's not just like a recipe. It'll be a recipe written by somebody who made that food in the book and will do a little bit of storytelling too as part of the recipe. So it's almost like an epilogue to the book rather than just a bunch of recipes stapled in the back. So the two things now go more hand in hand, and I do it all the way through so that by the time the book is done, that is all pretty much taken care of, has been tested multiple times. I know the food's going to work, and I know who's going to make it and why.
That's awesome. That was actually something that I wanted to ask you about. because you have the POV of the character presenting the drink. So I towards the end I actually have like Sonia's recipe, Daniel's recipe, Aunt Biz's recipe. So I thought that was actually really clever and creative. So that's actually like when you came to that idea, like you said, so the other part of that is I wanted to ask you about POV. So sometimes, so you chose first person, and sometimes cozies are third person. And so was that something that you actually said, you know what, I want this to be from the character's perspective as opposed to like third person or having multiple characters? Like, what was your thought process for creating this particular POV for this series?
So Delilah can be a little bit hard to handle, especially in that first book. She opens this restaurant and you find her in this moment where she's very stressed. And like a lot of type A people, she channels that stress into micromanaging her staff and freaking out about small details and kind of like bustling around trying to make sure everything is perfect. So I think seeing that from outside of her point of view, she might have come across as even more hard to like in those first couple of chapters because, she's kind of in a meltdown for when we find her in the first few pages of the first book. And as someone who struggles with perfectionism, or I should say, as someone who's learning to channel their perfectionism into healthy avenues, and as someone who does tend to be pretty detail oriented and like things to go a certain way, I think a lot of people can identify with that. So I felt like being in her head while she's doing things that you might be like, wow, you're really getting in your own way here, Delilah. A lot of us can identify with that struggle. And I thought it would be easier to empathize with her if it came from a place of like within her that you really understand her thought process. And that's proven to be a pretty good choice, I think, for the most part, because as an investigator, she's limited to her own knowledge. She can't, we're not like as a reader being able to jump in and see what the bad guy is doing and why, or, to see the clue that she missed. She's only able to see what she can see. So we as the reader have the same perspective as she does going through the story, where we discover things unfolding at the same pace that she does. Um, and, then you're just hoping that the reader finds that character somewhat relatable and also to be the kind of sleuth that they themselves want to be, because you never want the reader to be 3 steps ahead of your sleuth where they're like, geez, just look over there. It's her, she's the killer. So we want the reader to maybe be 1 step ahead just so they can feel like, ooh, I figured it out. But never so far ahead that it's the TSTL, too stupid to live main character that you see sometimes in like action books or mysteries that you're just like, man, no.
That's awesome. I wanted to ask you, how much research did you do for this book and or series? Because you mentioned several different things. You've got Native American history in there. You have Chicago mob history. You have Frank Lloyd Wright referenced a couple times. You've got wine, food, and knives.
So I have a brain that picks up trivia pretty easily. Um, yeah, this is like a weird superpower of mine that I hold on to factoids. So a lot of times I'll know a little bit about something, so that as I'm kind of passing through the story, I'm like, okay, so I know that, like this Native American group were prevalent in Wisconsin because I've seen that on a sign or something. So like now I just have to circle back and figure out a little bit more about that. So a lot of those kind of like ephemeral little bits of trivia that are sprinkled through are things that I knew or knew of and then, just went back to fact check or double check. And I'm a historian by training. That was my graduate degree, and so the history stuff comes pretty naturally to me. So one of the exceptions, this book, which At Death's Door, which is the fifth book, which just came out in October, for that one, I really had to do a deep dive, pun intended, on scuba because for this book, I wanted it to be about catfishing and ice fishing. So catfishing is in romantic scams, not like literal, like hillbilly hand fishing kind of catfishing. Um, and with those two things in mind, I wanted our dead body to involve a scuba diving accident and or what would appear as a scuba diving accident. And I have some friends who scuba dive, one who's an instructor. So I was like, I'll just like kind of wing it for now and then figure it out later. And so I wrote around those scenes and then sketched them in and made an initial pass based on some like internet research that I'd done and then sent it to my friends, one of whom is the writer Olivia Black and her husband. And her husband, who's been scuba diving for his whole life, read it and he was like, "So you killed Delilah like 6 ways that I count in just this one scene." She's diving too deep. She didn't put her equipment on properly. She, like all of these
Yeah.
things. Yeah. So I'm like, all right. So back to the drawing board on the research. So for that one, I really, because it's like this highly technical thing that I have no experience in, and I kind of knew that would happen, that this would be an iterative thing of like making sure that we got these details right. So I got a diving manual and like that you would use if you were t taking the diving test to become a dive master and then I watched a ton of YouTube videos and really got to understand this better and then sent it back again and he was like, okay, this works, like this I would believe. And yeah, passed it by a couple of other people who know what they're talking about. And I'm very fortunate in my life to have had a lot of different kinds of jobs and worked with and along a lot of people that have varied and interesting hobbies and interests. And that has really stood me in good stead as a writer because a lot of times people are willing, for the price of a cup of coffee to sit down for a half an hour and just tell me about this thing that they're an expert in. And um, yeah, that's proven extremely useful more times than I can count, where I can just call up somebody that I know who happens to be, a catering chef or a historian of a specific time period or place and just ask them questions. Because I figure if it can pass muster with somebody who actually knows what they're talking about, then the average reader will probably be like, sure, that could happen.
I love that. That's awesome. Because I mean, if you think about it, you want this to come across as, good information. You don't want it to be, oh, hypothetically, let's go back to the scuba example. Like she gets the bends, and now, okay, well, what happens when she gets the bends? Okay, we know if somebody who's a scuba diver is going to go, yeah, her hands are going to start shaking, like so they're going to be familiar with the stuff, but the rest of us, we're just like, oh, she's fine, she's fine. But you don't want that to come. You want to be an informed writer as well, which I greatly appreciate because that lets me know that you don't think I'm gonna I'll just use the word dumb. So thank you. So thank you for that.
No,
So
and
thank you.
if anything, like that process, especially of talking to people who know whatever, who have that domain of knowledge, whatever it is, cooking or scuba diving or whatever it is, often they'll say something that I'm like, oh my gosh, that gives me a much better idea than the one that I originally had. So, the chief of police, the retired chief of police of my town. I live in a fairly small town, and it's the kind of place where I know the mayor and the chief of police. And when he retired, he had some time on his hands, so we've had like a yearly ritual of sitting down together and talking about like the criminal proceedings and policing in my books. And I say, okay, what would you be thinking? Because a lot of times the scenarios are not in cozies are not like you find in a police procedural where they're really like having to work through, either by the book or off on
Right.
their own kind of thing. It's more like the amateur sleuth is doing most of the sleuthing, and then the policing is kind of light touch, just laying over the top of it. Um, but he's really good at, if I give him a scenario, like he'll come back with like, okay, well, I guess I would be thinking like this or acting like this if you threw me into this scenario. And some of the stuff that he said has translated directly into the police characters, especially Calvin Capone, who's the main love interest and main police presence throughout the books, that the way that he reacts to situations, not necessarily the specific things that he does, but the kinds of things that he's thinking about, will often come straight out of the mouth of this police officer that I know.
That's awesome. I love that. I love that. And I love that you reference Capote. Okay, so let's get into Chicago real quick because you reference several things Chicago. So first off, deep dish pizzas. Also at the end, you mentioned Illuminati's. I unfortunately have never had a chance to eat Illuminati's pizza, so so the fact that you even mentioned it just like made me happy. I put like double exclamation marks with a smiley face. But I wanted to ask you, in regard to like, you're from Chicago, so is is the influence prevalent? Like, is it just kind of like as a school kid, let's just say, as a school kid, you just know like Chicago, the mob, like Prohibition, like Elliot Ness, like the Untouchables. How prevalent is that in your like daily life and culture?
It's quite prevalent. Yeah, weirdly, it's quite prevalent. And especially, traveling. So I did a study abroad in Peru, and I was in this village in the middle of the Andes Mountains, in the middle of nowhere, and speaking in my terrible Spanish, having the kinds of conversations you have when you don't know a language well. And it was like, my name is Mindy. I am from Chicago, and like the basics. And the guy I was talking to was like, "Oh, Chicago, bang bang, Al Capone," and I was like, "Really? I mean, that was literally 100 years ago. Like, this is still what we're talking about." But that's happened multiple times, where that Chicago being synonymous with that, golden age of gangsters, for lack of a better word, is in people's minds. It's out there. And I think a lot of Chicagoans have just chosen to embrace it as part of our brand. I was just downtown a couple weeks ago visiting some family, and we went into a big hotel downtown, the Drake Hotel, which is one of the oldest hotels in Chicago. And I was talking to the concierge, and he was like, "Oh, I can't remember how we got on the subject. The history of the Drake, I guess, that he was saying that it's one of the oldest continually operating hotels in the Midwest." And he pointed to this spot above the check-in desk, and he's like, "Do you see how the crown molding there looks different than all of the other crown molding? um, if you kind of space it out, it's exactly at head height for like an average person." And that's where the gangsters like Capone, Dillinger, there was a secret card room up above there. And they would be able to look down through these little holes in the crown molding. It's like lacework almost, and see who was in the lobby. So if it was, their wife or a cop or a rival gangster, they would see them come in before anybody else did, and there was a passage to get out of that room. So this is something that like people still think about, and the physical fabric of it is still there in places like that, in places in like the lake next to Lake Geneva, which is where I got married, like Como. There was a secret room in the hotel where we had our reception that it's like a typical secret room, a bookcase that opens out, and then there's a card room back there. And then there's a trap door that goes down to the lake. So you could have a boat, and if, somebody came in and you needed to make a quick escape, trap door, you were right above the lake, get into the boat and off you go. So these things are still around, and it's still kind of a fun thing to think about and talk about.
That is so cool. So, I just recently learned there is a secret passageway in Hotel Roanoke. And I think I
Ooh.
don't know if it's I haven't been yet. I was just informed about it. But I wasn't sure if it was prohibition, the reason for that. I'm curious to know about that secret passageway and where it leads. So, um, we'll have to check that out
I know,
sometime.
I would love to know that because Prohibition was such a tiny little sliver of American history, but it had such an outsized impact on American culture because for 10 years or so everybody was a criminal, and they had to kind of keep up this facade of respectability while almost everybody just kept drinking, on some level.
It's so crazy. It's so crazy. So speaking of drinking, and we're going to be talking about coffee because this is coffee. So we're talking about drinking coffee now. Not hooch, as it was known then. But you referenced there was a part where Delilah goes to meet Veronica, and she references the part about how the shot was the barista didn't do it right. So I wanted to ask you, like, are you a secret barista?
That's so my husband is a wannabe barista. I sadly, like, despite the fact this, I'm gonna make a huge admission here, despite being on coffee fueled stories, I would only be able to be fueled by decaf coffee because I ex am extremely sensitive to caffeine. So like one of those mini Diet Cokes or a decaf coffee is about as much caffeine as I can handle. But my husband's the total opposite. He cannot survive without his coffee. So he's constantly researching barista setups of various kinds that we can have at home. And anytime we travel, he needs to know like what kind of coffee is available to him. So he's really, really, really into it and the mechanics of it, and has a lot of opinions about it. So he's my in-house coffee expert.
I love that. I love that. And there's no sh honestly, there's no shame. So that several people who have been on the show, they can't drink coffee, for whatever, personal reasons, medical reasons, things like that, or by choice. So it's not a prerequisite to being on the show. It's not. I
I do
understand.
actually love coffee. It's kind of one of the great sadnesses of my life that I really can't drink the real stuff because if I'm sleepy, my only choice is a nap. Like I have no other choice.
I totally understand. My mom wasn't allowed to have coffee either, but she loved coffee. So I grew up with the darkest, blackest decaf coffee being brewed in the house. And so when I was studying for undergrad, the pot was theirs, and I had my own instant coffee. And we had to make sure my mom did not ever grab the wrong cup on the counter if there was a cup of coffee on the counter. It was
Oh,
like,
wow.
Mom, don't drink it. This is my coffee. This is the full power. So I am very understanding and respectful, and I totally get the whole. I get it. It's very important. Like I said, my mom loved coffee. She grew up on coffee, and when her doctor told her she can't have coffee, she was like, "Well, can I have decaf?" And he was like, "Yes." She was like, "Okay, as long as I can have decaf, I'm happy."
I can
So
survive.
yes, I totally understand that. So. I wanted to ask you a few more questions here. We've got a bit more time if you're okay with this.
Sure.
Um, so in regard to purse hooks and coat racks, because you make a point to reference that about how restaurants and places that you go to, purses, sitting there holding your purse is a pain in the butt, and putting your purse on the floor. My family has a thing. We do not put purses on the floor because your money goes out the window. It's a superstition. Like our family just doesn't do it. And besides, it's dirty. It's gross. I don't want to
Yes.
put my bag on the ground. Like that's gross. So the fact that you put a section and you even talked about that. The sommelier compliments the chef about how she did that little touch. So I wanted to talk about purses and coat racks. Is that something that you personally feel very passionate about?
I kind of do. I'm not a big pet peeve haver. Like a lot of stuff rolls off of me. Like again, my husband is the pet peeve haver where he's like, people parking on the sidewalk. Like he has many little things like that really drive him nuts in any given day. And whereas a lot of stuff just rolls off me. But that's one thing that I'm always surprised, especially when you go into a nice restaurant. It's like, this is a nice restaurant. You put a lot of thought into the design. And yet, where do we put our coats and especially our purses? Because like maybe there's a coat rack when you first come in or a coat room, but most people who carry a purse want to have it with them,
Yeah.
and there's no place to put it. And that's yeah, just one of those societal things that really bugs me, especially because in my family, I'm like the designated haver of everything, that it's like you need a Band-Aid, you need a wet wipe, you need whatever. Like mom is the one who has all of the things. So I feel like I'm this like pack mule for my family, carrying all of the useful things around in my purse. So it drives me crazy that like even though we know this as a society that maybe a third or up to half of the population at any given time is carrying a purse. There's no provision like within a car or within a restaurant or any place that you go for where you're going to put this thing that everybody is carrying.
I know it's so frustrating. My mom ended up, I don't know if these still exist or not, but apparently there was this magnetic hook thing that like she actually kept it in her purse and it kind of folded and then it had like this little base. And so when we would get to a little cafe or restaurant or whatever, she would just whip out this little hook thing and just hang it right there on the edge of the table. And I was like, well, that is a brilliant design for when there isn't a place to hang your bag
Yes.
or your,
Yeah, and
so
it actually figured into the plot. I can't even remember how I started thinking about that, but it was something that like that ended up being important to the plot. And that's how a lot of these things work, that it's like I notice something in the real world or somebody says something to me, and those little details are the things because I think, a lot of writing any kind of genre fiction is going to be formulaic. If you're doing Westerns, there's going to be horses, there's going to be land agents or some baddie coming in, like the kinds of things that happen in these genre books are going to be similar. I'm not going to be the first one to use any given poison or any given mechanism of murder or discovery of clues. So I think for me, like the special sauce is filtering things through my own head and my own experience, and trying to put that, spin on it as much as possible to personalize it and make things as specific as possible and grounded in the real world so that the clues can unfold in a way that is surprising.
yes, and I'm not. So I try to do a spoiler free. So we won't do. We won't give away who is what and what happens.
No, but
But
readers, when you read about the purse hooks, know that that's not just a random detail.
um, what a couple more questions. So you used the term slapdash a couple times, and that is like one of my favorite words. I love the word slapdash. And so I wanted to ask you, do you have favorite words that you just absolutely have to place in either every book or at least in one book? Do you have a favorite word or words?
I don't have a favorite word, but I have words that I have actively tried to um, change the way that I use them or not use them. So I'm not a person who believes in hard and fast rules of writing. Like there are people who are very against adverbs, like she ran quickly across the whatever. And I think there's a good reason for that because you don't need to run quickly. You can dash, you can scurry. There are verbs that do the work of adverbs a lot of times and allow you to kind of be less wordy and be more specific and creative with your language. And I think there are certain habits that I have that over time, I feel like my editor at my publisher, like with every new book, she'll pick like one thing to be like, did you ever realize that you do this? Just so that it's not like all at once. So each
Yeah.
book gets maybe a little bit better because, she picks on one thing that she's like, a lot of times when you start dialogue, you start with like a but or a so, maybe think of just doing away with those and see what that does. So there are things like that that I will focus on a word level. And one of those things is verbs in general. So I think that there's a lot of scope in writing to pack a lot of information into your verbs. Because you can do a lot with adjectives. Yes, you can say that something, like that something is slapdash, and that tells you a lot, and it's a really fun word to say and to think about. And I think that there's utility in thinking about, all of your word choices. But for me, a lot of times, like if I'm really looking to sharpen a scene, especially something with like tension or emotion, then getting the verbs right is the thing that I most focus on.
I love that. I love that. What I don't like to, so even though this is about the writing process, the podcast itself, I like to let the what I call the writing nuggets happen naturally. And that is like the fact that you're talking about the verbs, like that is like a great writing nugget. So thank you for that. I just learned something new. So that's
My
awesome.
pleasure. It's a hard one bit of writing advice that actually goes back to high school. So thank you, Mrs. Justice and Mrs. Taylor in my high school writing classes, because that was something we were not allowed to use to be verbs in our essays, unless absolutely necessary, and there was no way around it. But that was something that they would pick up on. That would be your assignment is just get rid of all the to be verbs in your paper. You have to think of another way to say that without a to be verb. And I think it just opens up a lot of creativity. And it's kind of an under thought about part of the writing process.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I'd like to close the show out with a couple of things. First off, uh, you have lazy girl snacks. You reference lazy girl snacks. And I know I'm only talking about book one because that's the only book I was able to actually read. And I know you just came out with the the dough. I'm sorry. Can you what's
At
the title?
death's door.
At Death's Door. And I love the titles of your book. They're books. They're awesome. I love the references to the pizza. And then you have Public Anchovy number one. So again, the play with the mobsters, like that's just awesome. So I'm going to talk about Lazy Girl snacks from book one. And you mentioned dipping Triscuits in ranch dressing.
I think we all have our go-to, like that thing that trended on social media with like girl dinner, which can just be like whatever is in the fridge, that's dinner. But I think we all have our go-to kind of weird snacking combo. And I do love a Triscuit. I would probably go cream cheese over ranch dressing for myself personally. But again, that's just like one of those relatable details like that I think we all know sometimes, like if you're on the fly, you're just eating whatever comes into your face and sometimes preferentially seeking out some kind of weird combo of things that only is good. Like like have you ever put like a Reese's cup between two Ritz crackers? I actually haven't done that, but maybe it'd be good. And for somebody, maybe that's their go-to snack.
That's awesome.
Okay, so as we close out the show, the final thing I wanted to say was one of my lazy kid snacks was I used to make English muffin pizzas when I would come home. I was a latchkey kid.
Ooh, I love an English muffin pizza.
Right? So when you were talking about lazy girl snacks, I was like, I've been making lazy girl snacks since I was 9. But and you had and pizza, it's pizza. So everybody loves pizza. So again, I want to say, Mindy, congratulations on your latest book. And I love your pizza series. I can't wait to read them all. So thank you so much for hanging out and joining the show.
My pleasure. This was a blast. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. And despite all of our computer issues, we made it through. So the way that I end the show is I ask the guests to please say, "Go forth and be magical."
So I hope that everybody will go forth and be magical.